Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTGO codes, you can go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can even get a 5% discount on your orders by using the code OmniPoke. For today's video, I'm pretty excited because we're going to be exploring the rogue archetype that I'm really hoping is going to be reasonable. This is definitely a mad science-based deck. I could have gone too far with it. It's definitely wacky, and I have to be explaining a lot of the card decisions in here. But it's based around the new Sawsbuck card and trying to loop some Clefairy dolls that we get from the new set with Florges. So I'm calling this deck FlorSbuck, just the combination of the two Pokemon that really are centered around it. So let's jump into this basic concept. And really, that's the hit and run is now back in our format. I'm really happy to see this. Hit and run style decks has been like a mainstay in Pokemon for a long time, and the return of essentially a new age robo substitute in the form of Lillie's Clefairy doll really does just make this strategy viable, simply because Clefairy doll can sit in the active, your opponent doesn't take a prize when they knock it out. That's the entire basis of this deck. So we're going to keep forcing a Clefairy doll into the active, using Sawsbuck just to do 60 damage as a tiny little poke. It's not good damage, but it's just whittling away turn by turn while your opponent is wasting their own turns, hitting into Clefairy dolls whilst not, advancing their own game state. So very similar to like Domfan. That's one that has been like one of our most recent hit and run decks that's successful. Hitmonchan, if you play expanded, stuff like that. There's been plenty of other different alterations like Gengar with Trevenant, and you can go further back as well, I'm sure. But yeah, hit and run is like an age-old prospect that's being brought back, which I'm really happy to see, especially in a format where gusting is very, very limited. There's going to be a lot of decks simply playing Great Catcher only from the new set, and they simply won't be able to gust any of your Pokemon because this is a fully non-GX variant. So some decks will simply have no gusting option against you at all. A handful of other decks, if they do still choose to play Custom Catcher, they can only do it, twice in the best case scenario, which is definitely manageable for this deck. And for things like Ninetales, you have Stealthy Hood, so we can try and make it so they actually have no gusting effects against you ever, if you're able to run into your Stealthy Hoods quickly. So, I mean, in terms of gusting, we're really not worried about anything, which is really awesome, and that makes the Clefairy doll a potentially very, very scary card, especially when you combine it with Florges to loop the doll infinitely. Usually, in a regular deck, you can get through 4 Clefairy dolls if our damage output is low enough, like 60 from Sawsbuck. It's not a problem, but you make it a problem by infinitely looping this Clefairy doll thanks to the ability of Florges. So, let's jump into the Pokemon now. We are playing a JIrachi engine. As you know, I love JIrachi. Stellar Wish is awesome. Just leading out this guy is always fantastic. I'm always going to try and make room for him in basically every deck, because basically every deck that's been successful since JIrachi has been released, has played JIrachi. So, everything but Zoroark, I guess. So yeah, there's always a JIrachi rendition of basically any deck you can play. So that leads me to believe that this is probably worthwhile. We have some great turn 1 supporters that we can dig for with this deck. So having extra Stellar Wish accessibility, basically to get the new Oak setting supporter, which allows us to get a bunch of our basics down straight away, is going to be really nice. So access to that's always great. Of course, we play a lot of one-of item cards that we might want to pull out, and we want to try and find ourselves Clefairy dolls quickly, getting towards some important stadium cards as well in the deck. So JIrachi is just an incredible card, and on those turns where you don't have a Clefairy doll, sometimes you can just pivot your way into a JIrachi and just sacrifice that card as well, because you've got to move somewhere with your Sawsbuck. You can't just leave that guy active. So yeah, JIrachi is a really nice card, and he's the other option if you don't have a Clefairy doll on that turn as well. So playing the max copies will still get you value because you end up sacking them a lot of the time as well in those early turns before your ultimate combo is kind of built up, I guess. We then have a 3-3 line of Sawsbuck, not maxing it out because already we have good searchability for these Deerlings. We also do have the Ditto to be like a 4th Deerling, I guess you could say. There's a reason why we actually play this Ditto, and it's because of Oak setting. So that you can actually go ahead and get Deerling, Flabebe, and Ditto all from the Oak. So you can only evolve Ditto into Deerling, so it is literally a 4th copy, but it's an Oak searchable version, which is pretty cool. So yeah, we're playing 3 Deerling and a Ditto that we can get out And we don't need to max out this deck once again, just because you're trying to hit and run and not be gusted very often. So I'm pretty content with the 3/3 line. The Sawsbuck allows you to draw a card a turn. It doesn't sound like much, but it's actually a huge deal in this deck, because the combo of Florges is just amazingly like complemented by this card, because the Florges puts a card back on top of your deck if you flip heads. So you're going to try and get like Clefairy dolls back on top of your deck, and then use Seasonal Blessing just to draw straight into that Clefairy doll, bench it, and then use Bounce, 60 damage, and switch this Pokemon with one of your benched. Very simple. You just keep going into that Clefairy doll infinitely. That is the idea. Give your opponent something else to sort of eat up, while you can just try and loop that doll the following turn. The idea is we're going to try and get 2 Florges in play pretty much every game. Usually, like in the best case scenario, also 2 Sawsbuck, and then we're just going to be using those. Wondrous Gifts, it is on a coin flip, but I feel like if you play, if you have 2 in play, and we have like 3 Clefairy dolls anyway, so you can think like there'll be those turns where you like double tails, but there's also the turns you double heads where you can just double doll and feel a lot safer. So yeah, this Sawsbuck is a really awesome card. When combined with this Florges, it's really awkward that we have only 40 hit point Flabebes. There's obviously a lot of decks that can capitalize on that number of hit points. So definitely something that does concern me a little bit. This is actually like the chunkiest Flabebe that we have. There's also 30 hit point ones, but I'm not going near those, especially because Mew's in the format and is probably going to be a prevalent card just because of Reshiram. And, you know, equally it's good against like Mewtwo and Pikarom now at the same time. So yeah, obviously Mew's going to be a powerful card in this Cosmic Eclipse format. So having the 40 hit point ones is pretty important. And then there's the Florges. Wondrous Gift. Once during a turn, you may flip a coin. If heads, put an item from your discard pile on top of your deck. So we play a lot of like one-of items, which then become in like air quotes infinite. Same thing for like our gusting options. They can be infinite. Basically everything is in air quotes infinite in our deck in terms of items. So we're really trying to most of the time recover Clefairy dolls, but if you get additional heads, sometimes you get the leeway to get extra things back from your discard pile, which is really awesome, and it means we can go pretty cheeky and make a lot of cuts and just hope that the Wondrous Gift ability sort of sorts that out at some point during our games. We then have the 1 copy of our own Bench Barrier Mew. Obviously, we are a hit and run style deck, so we're most concerned about keeping our bench protected because we want people to be taking out the active Pokemon. So obviously defending against Naganadel Snipes, Reshiram Snipes, and Pikarom Snipes. Yeah, this Mew's just overall a phenomenal card to have in the list. And at the same time, it can actually really help us out against Pidgeotto Control, of course. Because we do have Energy Recycle System in the deck, and you can just keep using Wondrous Gift to get Energy Recycle System back, so you can like infinitely Psi Power, force them to knock out your Mew, and then you can recover that Mew with your Lana's Fishing Rod that you play as well. So you're basically going to try and infinitely Mew loop the Pidgeotto Control player, so they can't completely hand destroy you. Even if they do like start hand destroying you, you've got Seasonal Blessing anyway, so they can never actually perfect lock you. So the idea is you'll probably just Psi Power all their Pidgeottos until like their entire board is like ready to get knocked out all at once, and then like over 2 turns you'll just like Psi Power for 3 prizes, Psi Power for 3 prizes, it's the game. That's like pretty much how I expect it to go. So yeah, that could be pretty awesome. And if they are powering up things like a Rangaroo or Articuno to actually take the knockout, you can then start powering up Sawsbuck and start bouncing through them as well. That's always an option. So Mew mostly in here for defense against sniping attacks, but also is pretty clutch against Pidgeotto Control, because you have infinite Mew. Like other decks right now, they try and use Mew like early game against Pidgeotto, and sometimes they can set up multiple prizes, and obviously Malamar can use it very effectively because they can spell tag the guy as well. But in this deck we can just like infinite Mew, and that sounds really awkward for them to deal with. Onto the trainers. As I said, we play 1 Energy Recycle System and 1 Lana's Fishing Rod. This means that we have, in air quotes, infinite access to energies and Pokemon. That means that we can get away with these slightly lower counts, like not maxing out the Florges line, not maxing out Sawsbuck. So we can, you know, recycle these whenever we need to. I also play a very, very low energy count. So having Energy Recycle System to give us, again, in air quotes, like infinite, means that if people are using like custom catcher builds or whatever, you can still like be safe in that manner. We are playing 1 copy of Switch as well as 2 Escape Board. This synergizes, of course, with JIrachi, and Switch obviously just gets us out of the active with things like Florges. If, again, things like Pidgeotto Control are going to try and like stall us or whatever, so that 1 copy of Switch becomes Infinite Switch, so that's pretty nice. We only play 2 copies of Rare Candy. Obviously, there's a small prizing headache, but you can, once you've got the force, your first Florges online, and if the second Florges is the second rare candy is prized, you can just use Florges to get that rare candy back. So as long as you don't prize both, that's not going to be a problem for you. 3 custom catcher, again, similar deal. Just because you can get back your custom catchers with Florges, you only need to play 3 copies, similar to basically Pidgeotto Control, why it only plays 3 to play around prizing. 4 copies of Pokegear and Pokemon Communication, because we are a setup-based deck, so trying to get these Pokemon into play is a big deal, and obviously Pokegear for helping us get into our key supporter cards that you'll see on a later slide is going to be really important for us. I think keeping these counts maxed out is still super important. Like we've seen, again, like I've been playing a lot of Pidgeotto Control recently, and like you can't really ignore the fact that like you have to play 4 Pokegear, you have to play 4 Acrobike and just dig through the deck with that build just to get your combo working. This kind of feels the same, where I don't want to compromise on the 4 OVs of Pokegear and Com just because you want to get onto the board as quickly as possible, and that's the reason why we play JIrachi build as well. Then we have the 3 Lillie's Clefairy doll. So we can play this card as if it was a 30 hit point colorless Pokemon. Any time during your turn, you may put this card on the bottom of your deck. If you do, just card all cards from it. So this is really awesome. Obviously, if people aren't going to attack into your Lillie's Clefairy doll, you can just put it to the bottom of your deck instead, and then like go back into your Sawsbuck and bounce. Alternatively, you could just use your Florges to get back your 1 copy of Switch, so that you like still have the Clefairy doll on board. That's another reason why Switch is super important, because this card can't retreat. So you can just use the Florges to get back Switch and then move it out of the way. It's sometimes a little bit easier than putting this card to the bottom of your deck. It depends like on your own deck size, but this card also stops you decking out, which is actually pretty reasonable. I think most of the time you won't deck out unless you've got like 3 Sawsbuck in play or something. And you'll like start running your deck pretty thin, but Florges is always putting cards back on top of the deck anyways, and this card can put itself to the bottom, so it's never really an issue decking out here, especially when you have Recycle System and Lana's Fishing Rod. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, if this Pokemon is knocked out, your opponent can't take any prize cards for it, so that's really awesome for you. That's the whole combo. We're playing 3 copies of Stealthy Hood. This is a very versatile and integral piece to this deck to mean that we don't just fold to a handful of matchups. We can protect our Florgeses and Sawsbuck against Ninetales, which is a really, really big deal. It also protects us against sniping from things like Volcarona, which is obviously a new card coming out from this set, which would otherwise be hellish for you. Especially with things like 40 hit point Flabebes and stuff. That would really, really get ugly. I still think that matchup could be pretty rough, just because you like need to naturally find these Stealthy Hoods ASAP to not be too concerned. I've actually thought about putting an Adventure Bag in this deck just for that early turn. Depends on how popular Volcarona ends up being. But in a lot of the other matchups, you don't need to find the Stealthy Hood for like a while. This also gives you the small upside of like protecting you against Distortion Door, which is actually a pretty big deal actually, because they'll try and set up Espeon Deoxys against you, and giving them extra Distortion Door damage could be scary, because you never really want 2 Florges to go down at once. Then you are not infinite at all, and you're basically like just relying on what's still in your deck to actually recover your combo. So Stealthy Hood's really important for all those reasons. I'm playing a 2-2 split of stadiums. We play Lusamine, so we're going to try and make sure the correct stadium sticks in whatever matchup we're in. Lysandre Labs is super important for Malamar, same reason why the Hood helps against Distortion Door. Labs means that we don't lose to Spell Tag. Essentially, I'm doing this exactly so that your Florgeses don't go down at once. Like, if both of them die to an Espeon Deoxys, you get really, really worried, because you need to hope that you still have like rare candies and Lana's Fishing Rod and stuff in the deck to then like recover a Florges all over again. So Lysandre Labs to allow us to hit through Giratinas with spell tags and stuff is going to be super important. And then we play 2 copies of Power Plant. Again, extra protection against Volcarona. Alongside the Stealthy Hood, like they sort of go in tandem with one another. There'll be a eventual point where a Power Plant is like the only remaining stadium. You've got Lusamine, so you can try and like loop it or whatever. And it's also pretty good against Mewtwo, of course, as well. I've kind of prefer this card like early game against Mewtwo, because once they've used Espeon Deoxys, and if you've got Mew, you're not worried about any Naga attacks or anything. So like the Power Plant sticks and just sort of gives you certainty that you've won the game, but it's more so just defense against those opening turns. You just kind of just play it on turn 1, maybe it sticks, or just like when they're starting to get their Espeon Deoxys combo going, you can, just try and work a Power Plant in there as well. Obviously, Mewtwo normally plays like 4 Stadiums at least and Marshadow, so it rarely ever sticks, but it's something that we can do against them. I'm also have this in here just to like give them extra speed bumps along the way, because the supporters that we have, like Oak Setting is only good on turn 1 most of the time, and we play Rosa, which is only activated when Pokemon are knocked out, so you oftentimes have the opportunity to like Lusamine back, Lusamine Stadium, like all the time in this deck. Like it happens just so much, so you may as well just have that option to get the stadiums and just win the stadium war for some crucial matchups for sure. So here are the supporters. I just named them all. 2 copies of Lusamine so that we can do that loop, and essentially it's so I can win the stadium war. That's the biggest reason why I play Lusamine. We don't really care about getting back these supporters per se. Maybe every now and then you'll get back a Rosa, but most of the time you'll be using Lusamine just so that you can win stadium war against people. And when we play 4 copies, like even when you're just bouncing something relevant for the opponent, even if it's like just a Power Plant in a matchup that's not ability based, it just sometimes forces them to move their own stadium out of the way, which is a pretty big deal. So that Lusamine's pretty nice. We have the 4 Rosa, great new supporter from this set. It can only be used if one of your Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn, and you get to search your deck for a Pokemon, a trainer, and a basic energy, reveal them and put them into your hand. This is essentially the lifeblood of the deck. Seeing as though we can go ahead and grab ourselves a Florges and a Rare Candy as well as energy, that's a huge deal for us. It means we get away with, again, the slightly lower count of Florges, the low count of Rare Candy, and the low count of energy. Rosa just means that we can go ahead and scout those super easily, and yeah, really, really important. Oftentimes JIrachis will go down early. If your opponent knows you're playing a Rosa engine and don't want to take knockouts, that's fine by me as well, because you can just start Stellar Wishing and still get hand advantage and stuff. So yeah, Rosa's absolutely nuts, and is what kind of makes this deck work in all honesty, just because it gets the early Rare Candy Florges, and that just sets you up so nicely. It can also go ahead and get you things like Sawsbuck plus Stealthy Hood and stuff like that. It gets you a lot of different combos. It's a really nice card in the deck. And then we have our best turn 1 supporter in Professor Oak's setting. You search your deck for 3 basic Pokemon of different types and put them onto your bench. That's why I do play the Ditto, because Oak does have that extra text saying that it has to be different types. So you can go ahead and get Floette, Ditto, Deerling, or you can go ahead and get like Ditto, Deerling, JIrachi or something like that as well. Like if ever you start one of your other Pokemon, they all have 1 retreat, so you can just like pay retreat into a JIrachi as well. So this card is very versatile and strong, and really helps our setup in the early turns. Sometimes you'll use this on turn 2 as well. So yeah, it's just like a really reasonable card that we want to get down as soon as possible, so got to max out the copies of that guy as well. Onto the energy. I told you it was a low count. We play 1 copy of the new Draw Energy, just because Sawsbuck has a 1 colorless in its attack cost. You never get punished for playing 1 copy of this card, which is awesome. You draw a card when you attach. That's it. It's a small upgrade, but it's a little consistency boost to just playing a 4th Grass Energy, which is really nice. So yeah, just 3 copies of Grass Energy. I think with Recycle System you're fine. For the most part, we're just hoping that people don't gust us, and if they are playing custom catchers, they can only do it a couple times, and then you can always recycle energy. Or sorry, you can always use Energy Recycle System to get back those energies as well if you need to with Florges or whatever. So shouldn't be too big of a deal. You have Rosa to pull these out of the deck immediately, so that's always pretty good as well. So yeah, just a 1-3 split of energies. If you don't like Draw Energy, you could also try Recycle Energy for a similar thing. Like that could even be better against Pidgeotto control as well, just because then your opponent is trying to hammer away a Recycle Energy and then just randomly Mars it out of your hand instead. Instead of you having to like always flip for Florges to get back your Energy Recycle System or whatever. So yeah, that's another alternative option. If you don't like the Draw Energy, it could be a Recycle as well. I don't think that's the worst card in the world at all. So here's the full list. Very, very wacky, very crazy. We're trying to defend against a lot of different things here. I'm hoping that, first of all, there'll be a lot of decks moving to Great Catcher in the first place. So then the Clefairy Doll loop is just going to auto-win, basically, as long as you get set up. You have the Stealthy Hoods to protect against all these annoying abilities that either do gusting or do spread damage. And yeah, from there, you're just trying to make sure that you can do 60 a turn. And that's enough to beat people, which is going to be hilarious, I hope. So yeah, Onto tech options, I've thought about Netball. We already play a very low grass energy count, so just having 1 or 2 copies of Netball wouldn't be bad in the deck. Again, giving you extra access to early Deerlings is never a bad thing. Also, Crushing Hammers could also be nice. I think a couple of Crushing Hammer might be all you need, of course, because you can try and Florges them back, but for the most part, you're probably using Florges to get back Clefairy dolls, let's be honest, so I don't think it's like mandatory to play these Crushings. It's not the same as like Orangaroo getting back 3 guaranteed every turn. It's like sometimes you get a random hammer that then has to flip heads anyway to get value. So yeah, the Crushing Hammer, like maybe even just stick 1 in the list and like there'll be random spots where it's helpful. But for the most part, I was kind of thinking like that's one of the ways that Pidgeotto Control can defend against early Mewtwo spreads, and that's the thing that I'm most afraid of. And then the other thing that you could go for instead of the Power Plant option, you could go for 1 Mimikyu, 1 Shrine, and be more proactively defensive against Mewtwo, force them to find their own Stealthy Hoods, or force them to find a way of knocking out this Mimikyu as well, which may be difficult for them if it's got protection from like Mew and stuff on the bench, and if they're just playing great catchers or whatever. So yeah, it might force Mewtwo to play Stealthy Hood in future. I believe like it has to, just because of the introduction of this Mimikyu regardless. So I don't think it's as like stable as Power Plant will be overall. But Shrine of Punishment plus Mimikyu combo would be really awesome. The only like headache then becomes that you have like more copies of one-ofs, like the Mimikyu can then be prized or the Shrine can then be prized, and then you feel really unhappy that you're playing these cards instead of just 2 Power Plant, which is a little bit safer. But what I will say about the Mimikyu combo is that it's like a lot safer against like early Mewtwo pressure and early Volcarona pressure, which I think is one of the things that we are definitely scared of. So I could definitely see you guys making an extra space to put in like 2 Shrine and a Mimikyu. I think then I'd be a little bit happier. Also, Shrine just in general means that our damage output isn't like rubbish, and if you're playing Lusamine, Shrine will eventually just get there and be damage ticking over on people, and it will close the game a little bit quicker, basically, is a nice little upside in addition to this Mimikyu combo. For the matchup overview, I've still put Ability Zard as like a potentially awkward matchup, mainly just because if they just like go first and evolve into a Ninetales turn 2 and they like just start killing your Flabebes or whatever early, that just gets really rough. So it's basically like a waiting game for you guys to try and find your Stealthy Hoods to start protecting your board, and at the same time like they can always have like a different target, right? So you can like Stealthy Hood 1 Flabebe, and then like they can attack your Deerling, and then like even if you like Rosa and find a second Stealthy Hood, then you protect like your next thing, but then there'll be something else on your board that they can kill. So they'll definitely be able to like race ahead in prizes, and then it's like if you've got enough Stealthy Hoods in your deck to actually survive the Ninetales overall. Ideally you have all 3, none of them are prized. You can get 1 Flabebe, oh sorry, 2 Florges and 1 Sawsbuck, all protected with hoods, and then everything else on your board is like Clefairy doll, basically. That would be the ideal board state. But sometimes that's just not going to happen, and if you only have 1 Florges, like if you only have 2 Stealthy Hoods in your deck, you're just relying on 1 Florges every turn to get back your Clefairy doll, which isn't great. So that's definitely something that could be awkward. I also think Mewtwo will be a pretty bad matchup for you, just because the Flabebes only have 40 hit points, so even a Mewtwo just doing an Espeon Deoxys for 100 damage is still like backbreaking. They can kill 2 Florges at once, or they can kill like Ditto Florges. Sorry, I'm saying Florges, I mean Flabebe. They can just knock out both of those at once, or knock out your Deerling that you just attached to and a Flabebe at the same time. It's great tempo, and it really hurts your engine all at once. I think there will be like a complete halt to people taking prizes against you, but it's more so that like you just have to really weather the storm until your combo is ready. And I think the thing that's most scary is if they knock out 2 Flabebes at once, and then like you can't find your Lana's fishing rod or something like that, or you have prized a Flabebe, things get very ugly for you. And if they do get that 200 damage, boy is that scary. You really hope that you've just high rolled into a rare candy early, or that they had to use Solgaleo to like knock out a JIrachi so that you can Rosa straight away to rare candy up into Florges, because as soon as they do that 200 damage, it gets very painful for you if you've not been able to evolve up your Flabebes, because it's just such easy prizes for them, whilst also ruining our engine. You'll notice there are a handful of other things that I like haven't put as bad matchups. I think Pidgeotto Control's fine. Again, we're like infinite enough with our Mew to be able to beat that matchup a lot of the time, I would think. If you can survive Judge, you can beat Pikarom for sure. And because we play for JIrachi, I feel a little bit safer that we can do that. And also, they just like won't have any answers to you, I think. As long as you don't prize your Mew, it should be pretty easy. I think the The only other things that are awkward are Behemoth. They're also a hit and run deck, but they stop you playing items, and our deck is completely based around looping one item over and over again. Silvally Volk, I also think is just one of these awkward matchups. Like, it makes you find Stealthy Hood really quickly. So the more I sort of discuss it with you guys right now, I'm kind of like, man, I should probably play an Adventure Bag, just because you could Rosa for Adventure Bag and then get 2 hoods down at once. But that's really dependent on how heavily played the Silvally Volcarona deck is played. So yeah, just try and find those Stealthy Hoods in those matchups where it's important, basically. There's then the Dark Box deck, which is able to take additional prizes with their good old, what's this called, Guzzlord, and that's really awkward, because then Clefairy does give up a prize card, and it's down to you to use Sawsbuck to do 60, 60, 60, and finally you've killed it in 3 attacks. So if they only play 1 Guzzlord, you can probably still win, but if they play 2, you never win. So yeah, I think Dark Box is very bad. It's like a very bad matchup for this deck, because it's completely reliant on saying no to your opponent taking prizes, and Dark Box just says, well, yes, I'll still take prizes. So that's pretty rough, especially like if they just happen to have options of killing like JIrachis and stuff early on or whatever. If you've not managed to get your setup going, that would be very awkward, and they'll just run you out of turns basically to win the game, just because they'll be munching through you, and you've really got to get Sawsbuck rolling quickly to start defending against that Guzzlord ASAP, and that doesn't sound like an easy thing to do with this build. So my closing thoughts is that this is very wacky, but for the most part I think the prevalence of Mewtwo will still keep this deck at bay for the most part. It's going to be really fun. It has some insane auto wins that it's just like, there's going to be those games where your opponent just flips over like a Deerling, and you're like, oh Christ, I actually can't win here. But then again, there's going to be so many people like licking their lips as soon as they see you put down 2 Flabebes, and then they just like welder attach, put Deoxys in the bin, and sprinkle for those 2 easy prizes, and then it's down to your opponent to like re-establish their Florges and whatnot. But that's really going to be difficult for them, I would say. So yeah, I think it really has polarizing matchups, I guess is the best way to put it. I'm also going to be exploring Behemoth, of course. Once I go through all of these like brand new decks, I will be revisiting all the other archetypes that we have that change with Cosmic Eclipse, and I think a big buff to Behemoth is this Lillie's Clefairy doll. It really will help the deck out a lot, I think. And it basically buys you 4 free turns, which is so huge when a lot of the time Behemoth is trying to buy turns with things like a Alolan Ninetales, or trying to buy turns with Fluffy Pillow Mareep. These are like guaranteed 4 free turns, so that's a lot of damage that you can put on the board with Behemoth for free now, which is pretty awesome, and really does hurt the opponent when their setup is stifled by item lock the whole time as well. So I definitely want to explore Behemoth. I don't think it'll have the opportunity to fit in a Florges, because they don't really want to play a Rosa engine, because they're all special energy based. But maybe you play like a 1-0-1 line or a 2-0-2 line of Florges in Behemoth as well, just to have more infinite Lillie's Clefairy dolls. I haven't really figured out just yet, but Behemoth is definitely a tight list in his own right, and trying to work in the 4 Clefairy dolls is going to be hard enough. So that's a project that I've got to leave with myself and work out at some point later on, but I imagine they won't really have space for Florges overall. Let me know what you guys think about this absolutely wacky deck. If you have any other questions about the build at all, I'll sort of hear them all down below. If you have any other ideas to help out some of those matchups, which I think are awkward, like I said, like the Mimikyu Shrine is kind of like a greedy answer to Mewtwo and Volcarona early on in the game, which could be pretty good. And it might be something that I just sort of say, yeah, I need to make space for this in the end. But that's it for today, guys. I hope you did enjoy this very wacky deck from Cosmic Eclipse. I think, I hope now that I've kind of turned some heads about FlorSbuck, and I finally put pen to paper and shown off this deck, because a lot of people have been like asking me about this deck in like a meme way, and I've just been like, yeah guys, just wait, you'll see. And hopefully now you see what I see in FlorSbuck, and respect the power, even if you do think it's going to be meme garbage at the end of the day. That's it for today though, guys. I'll be back with another Cosmic Eclipse deck tomorrow. So yeah, I'll see you then.